So in the first part of this series, we talked about ways to formally, golly. So in the first part of this series, we talked about ways to formally, golly Moses, formally. So in the first part of this series, we talked about ways that you can go to school and gain new skills. The second part, we're going to talk about ways to gain skills informally, golly. And in the second part, we're going to talk about ways that you can do it just here in the shop. Stand by. Hey everybody, welcome back to RATTLECAN Fab Shop. I am James, and we are talking about ways to gain skills. First part of the series, we talked about how to go to school, different schools you can go to. Now we're going to talk about the way that I think most of us go about gaining our skills. And you may not look at it as a learning opportunity, but they are. Everyone in their life should have a friend of the channel J. Someone who will call them up and say things like,
"Yo, Sparky, I got another project for you." "Hey, Sparky, I know what we're going to do today." "Hey, Sparky, so I've been thinking."
And all of those things basically equate to, I need you to do something for me. And it may be a skill that you don't possess. I have a couple of examples here. One of them is, as we mentioned, for a friend of the channel, Jay, and his pretty car, his pretty Z car Zoe. And he says, "I have some holes in a cast aluminum intake manifold, and I need those holes plugged up." Easy if you know what you're doing. At that point in time, I had no idea. I had seen this done. I had not actually done this. So, the informal way of gaining this new skill that someone needed me to do, in my mind, first thing I had to do is I had to figure out the process. And to figure out the process, I needed a practice piece. So I found a piece of 1/2-inch thick aluminum, and I drilled a series of holes in this plate. Some are little tiny holes, and some are bigger holes, approximately the size of the holes that needed to be filled on the aforementioned manifold. So we get this plate made, and then the fun part starts. Well, it's aluminum, so aluminum, you have to weld it on AC. So we get some practice welding AC on the TIG welder. The problem is getting your weld nugget down inside this hole. And there's a learning curve to that. And so it took a day of sitting down, and part of it is going to what I call YouTube University, or the Academy of Social Media, or the interwebs, the intelligentsia interwebicus, and trying to see people who have done this and the techniques that are involved in that. And part of that has to do with the angle that you're doing this at. Part of it has to do with how far you can get your tungsten to stick out. Part of it has to do with the flow and the gas that you can get down in there. The amperage that you need to do that at. A little trick that I had learned was to cut up little pieces of filler metal and to put those down in the hole, and you can use those to kind of start a puddle, and then you can build up upon that. So the intake that was in question originally started out looking like this. We made our practice plate, and then we gained a new skill by filling these holes up. We got to discover how nasty cast aluminum can be, especially cast aluminum that has been in an engine compartment for a number of years. So that's one way that you can gain a skill, is somebody says something and you don't necessarily know how to do it, but you may be the only resource that that person has at the time. And so you use your cranium to figure out how to do that skill and then apply that skill for someone who needs some help. Now, there's another way, and I just call them projects. I have this miraculous thing in my pocket, the wonderful pocket computer, that I can access a majority of the world's knowledge. It's in my pocket. I mean, it's amazing. And you'll be looking at something, you'll see a little short video clip. Usually they're sped up of somebody making something. And so I saw one of those and I went, I wonder how to do that. And so what I did is I sat down with my Pihoni and watched this video and paused it, and I came up with what I'm about to show you, which is a 2-page listing of the equipment that I thought that I would need to build this. It's a bracket. I don't need a bracket. I got piles of brackets around here, but they did it in a way that I thought was interesting and that would give me some fabrication experience in my shop at very little cost, because all of this stuff that I just had laying around the shop. So other than my time and a runny nose, because it's cold in here, that's what I had invested in this. So I went through, I figured out the supplies that I needed, I figured out the equipment that I needed, and I kind of gathered that up. And then I started doing some reverse engineering or figuring it out with the materials that I had. There were some things that I saw that I thought, that's kind of interesting. And then there were some things that I saw and I was kind of like, I don't know about that. And through that process, I was able to come up with this. Now, this is not the completed object. This is, again, an exercise to see, could I make this happen? If I was going to make this happen, how would I make it happen? What changes would I have made? As you can see, or maybe not see, these are just tack welded on here because I'm looking at position. This has a hole to fixate the shelf on top of it, and there is currently only one hole to affixate it to the wall. There's not another hole to affixate it to the wall, so obviously that's not a functional shelf. I started this using a MIG welder just to do some little tiny spot welds, and that ran out of gas. And then the next day when I was in using a TIG welder to do some, well, that ran out of gas too, so lucky me, I got to take 2 tanks to the welding supply store, who was more than happy to take all the money I had in my pocket and just a little bit more. And so this got me thinking, how do I, first of all, structurally, how do I make this so that it does what it's supposed to do? It supports, let's just say this bookshelf is going to hold, I don't know, books. So is my design going to support books? And if the structural aspect is satisfied, then we go on to the aesthetic purpose. Does it look appealing? I don't know. People might look at this and think it's hideous, and that's fine. But one of the things that I have considered is, do I use the MIG process in order to fully weld this out, knowing the type of bead appearance I'm going to get? Do I use the TIG welder to get a different looking weld bead? Or do I use silicone bronze? Because then I'm going to get a great contrast on the visual aspect of that. I don't know. I don't have the answers to any of that right now because we're not done with this, and it's not on the front burner because it's a skill project. It is something that I have chosen to do in order to figure out something that I'm not quite sure about how to do it, and don't necessarily have a finely polished set of skills to go with that. And there are a number of things like that here around the shop. This is another aluminum plate that if I'm having to weld aluminum, I use this as just a practice plate, just to kind of get my muscle memory up and going, trying to kind of get into the groove. I don't know about you guys. It takes a while to get me warmed up because, I'm 1,000,000 years old. So I find for me personally that if I'm going to do any kind of welding, I try to get warmed up. I try to lay some beads down in a material that is the same type, that is close to the same thickness, so I can kind of get my settings right. This is a box that I thought I would, first of all, I had to fabricate this, and my sheet metal tools here in the shop are not. They're not. I have this chintzy POS bender from Hobo Freight. Works really good bending aluminum, foil, and other than that, it's kind of suspect. But I was able to construct the blanks to build this box to kind of practice my stainless steel welding on an outside corner. And the plan is eventually to just cover that whole box with welds that I would use to get warmed up before I go to welding something else. This is a project when I first got my prime weld. It's an AC/DC 225. I wanted to know what the different settings would do. So I found these two pieces of stainless left over from an art project that I did, and I sat down and annotated all of my settings on there to see what they would do and to see, do I like the way this looks? Are they structural? Am I getting penetration? Is this a solid weld? Is this just a pretty, Insta-snap weld for people to ooh and ah over? Those are ways that you can gain a skill that you may not currently have, and sometimes you can actually, make something out of it. It's the same principle as what we're doing in the formal education track that I'm in right now. We make widgets. They call them different things. They call them, there's a lathe widget, there's a hole drilling widget. There are little things that you make in order for you to gain those skills. You don't have to be in a formal shop program to do those kinds of exercises. If you use the Googly machine and look for welding skill projects or machine shop skill projects or lathe skill projects, you're going to find all kinds of stuff where you are given a set of dimensions, and the purpose is not to make the widget is not the end product. That's not what you're after, because nobody wants a bench full of widgets. What you're after is the journey. Can you turn this piece from a rough 1-inch stock down to a 750 thousandths plus or minus, 2/10, and then step that down to a 1/2 inch part, plus or minus 2/10, that is a 1/2 inch long, plus or minus? Can you make a cone on the end of this to a 45-degree angle, plus or minus? When you're done, it's not the lathe widget you want. It's the ability to explore a skill, hone a skill, understand the process. That's what informal skill training is all about. It can be triggered by a guy like that who has a project and he needs something done, and you can have all kinds of skill experiences working on parts, working on gas tanks, working on intake manifolds, working on parts. We made a press part to go on his hydraulic press so that he could do something on the car. No idea how to do that. One of the very first projects that I ever did welding wise for a friend of the channel, Jay, and we are off to the races, so to speak. So anyways, you're limited partially by your imagination. You're limited partially by the tools that you have on hand. Don't be discouraged if you need to make something circular and you don't have a lathe. There may be the possibility that you can chuck that up in the drill press and do it. Maybe, I don't know. Don't be afraid to go onto the googly machine and start looking for alternative shop processes. There are some very, very skilled people who are making all kinds of stuff on the interwebs, and you can gain skills. You might not necessarily need to make a latch to latch the gate to your backyard, because you may not have a backyard, may not have a gate, may not have a use for any of that stuff. But if there's a way that they are joining two pieces of metal or two pieces of wood, or a piece of wood and a piece of metal together, you can file that away and use that at a later date. Anyway, we've rambled on too long. The coffee's getting cold. It's RATTLECAN Fab Shop. Keep chasing those skills, because in my mind, the day you stop learning, that's the day you start dying. I'm not ready to die. Hey, if I can do it, you can do it. You guys have a great weekend. If you got any comments, put them in the comment section down there beneath the sermon notes. Click the like if you found it entertaining. If you think I'm an idiot and you can say so in a nice way, why don't you put that down there too? If you have ideas for skills that you think would be useful to the, other 4 people, including my mom, that watch this, then put that in the comment section below too, because I'm never so smart that I can't learn something, and I love seeing the ways that people overcome the challenges that they have, either by a lack of skill or a lack of equipment or whatever. You guys have a great weekend. Cheers.
Thanks for taking the time out of your day to spend it here with me. Hope you enjoyed this video. Here's one that you might enjoy as well. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that button, hit the bell next to it so that you get a notification when we drop a new video. If you got comments, put them down beneath the sermon notes. And remember, if I can do it, you can do it. You guys have a great weekend. Cheers.